so today is March 22nd, 2024. The reason why that's important is because this is an ever-evolving case, so things may change. So as of today, there's two important areas for this NAR settlement. One is antitrust and the other one is steering. So antitrust, when it comes to our industry, basically means setting compensation or commission to a certain amount, not allowing competition to come into the market. And steering, again, when it comes to real estate, specifically for this, for NAR lawsuit purposes, means possibly an agent steering or influencing a buyer to purchase one home over another based on the amount of money they're going to make, not letting competition enter the market.
So this does affect the real estate market. However, contrary to popular belief, this is not the end of real estate, nor is it the end of the real estate agent. This is just simply a change like many other changes that the real estate market has faced over the last couple decades. Number one, what this does is this gives more access to home sellers. So before, you had to offer compensation to a buyer's agent in order to be listed on the MLS or real estate marketplace. Now, with just a listing agent and not offering any compensation to a buyer's agent, you can still have access to the same marketplace. The second thing that this settlement provides for is greater transparency on the freedom of choice that home sellers have always had. And so you have the option to pay a listing agent or not. If you want to sell your home by yourself, you certainly can. You don't need a listing agent to do that. Secondly, you can hire a listing agent, but then have an agreement where you're not paying anything toward a buyer's agent. Now, whether these things are advisable or not is one story, but these things have always been negotiable. And so this is now bringing more transparency to that process.
It's also important to know that the settlement has not been approved by the court yet, so that may take a couple of months. So as a recap to the settlement, one of the areas outlined in the settlement is that NAR will pay 418 or a little bit over 418 million in the course of 4 years. Also, number two, buyer's agents' compensation will no longer be included in the MLS. Number three is that all buyer agents must enter into a written agreement with the buyer before showing the first home. Also, finally, number four, if these changes are accepted by the court, they will go into effect mid-July. So what does that mean for the sellers? First, the sellers always have had the right to negotiate what they pay in commissions. The difference now is that the commission is now negotiated in two separate parts. The first part is the negotiation of how much the seller is going to pay their agent. And the second part is how much the seller is willing to pay the buyer's agent. What does that mean for the seller's agent? Well, number one is they can continue to negotiate the way they have, which is they negotiate an overall commission rate, and from that amount, they establish how much they want to give to the buyer's agent. Number two, they can establish their commission rate and set up the deal for success by establishing how much the seller is willing to pay the buyer's agent. The third option is the worst option, and that is for the listing agent to only establish their portion of the commission and leave the other portion to chance. Why that's the worst of it is because it gives the seller a false impression that there's not money to be paid for the work that a buyer's agent is doing. The buyer's agent is not going to work for free.
Now, here's what's very important to understand. Is that even though you don't have to offer a buyer's agent any compensation, doesn't necessarily mean that is a good move. So you can put yourself on the MLS, but if you decide as a home seller not to pay a real estate commission to a buyer's agent, you are leaving yourself open only to buyers that do not have representation or buyers that can afford to pay their own representation. Therefore, if there is a buyer who cannot afford to both buy your home and pay their agent, you may not see those buyers at all. And so a buyer's agent can negotiate with you to have some of their fee paid by seller's concession, but isn't that just paying their commission anyway? And so wouldn't it be a better idea just to establish and negotiate what a fair market rate would be to pay a buyer's agent? Because again, the moral of the story is that nothing is fixed. Everything is negotiable, but just because everything is negotiable doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay something. Everything has a value, and this is a free market society. So the more you pay, the more you're going to get. The less you pay, the less you're going to get. And obviously, there's a lot of gray area in between.
So what does that mean for the buyer? If the settlement does get approved, in mid-July, then that means the buyers will be entering into a formal agreement with the buyer's agent. Similar to a listing agreement, the buyer's broker agreement spells out the terms of compensation. The terms will have either a flat amount or a percentage that the buyer will pay their agent upon completion of the deal. As stated before, some of that amount or all of it may have already been established by a strong listing agent.
So this actually places a greater burden on buyers than what previously existed. Number one, a buyer's going to have to decide whether to go it alone in their real estate transaction or to align themselves with a quality professional that they will then have to compensate. So this puts buyers in a predicament where if they were already struggling to afford to purchase a home before, this is now an added expense that they have. One caveat is it's now more important than ever who you align yourself with as a buyer's agent. This is where the cream rises to the top. Not all agents are built the same, and this is where agents can establish their value in negotiating and the service they provide to the equation. A good buyer's agent is going to fight hard to get all or part of their compensation paid for by either the listing agent or the seller in the transaction. And if they can't, they should still be able to justify their compensation in the value that they bring to a buyer. So this will affect buyer's agents in a positive way in the long run. So up front, all buyers must enter into a written agreement before they show a property. What this does is this outlines the services that are offered by the agent and the compensation that that agent will receive in return. Now, the benefit of this is that everyone's on the same page about, and there's transparency about the process. Also, this will provide a greater amount of loyalty between a buyer and a buyer agent because they are under a contractual agreement to work with each other. And so many buyers agents often will say that a buyer has flaked out on them or chosen to work with a different agent. That problem will no longer exist with these written agreements. But now the buyer's agents have the burden of stating why their services are worth what they're asking in compensation. So this is the equivalent of tipping in the service industry. A buyer can choose to go it alone. You could walk into a restaurant, sit down at the bar and say, I would like to be served, but you will be not receiving any tip from me when we are done. And then take their chances whether their service is good or not. So we're just getting that agreement done out up front. Wouldn't it be great if you could walk into a restaurant and tell the server up front what they could expect to receive if the service is good? This is very similar. And so the poor agents that do the minimum, that don't have a level of expertise or value to add to the equation, will ultimately fade away from the industry. And so I believe it will increase the amount of professionalism across the board.
So if the seller's agent was not necessarily the strongest agent and didn't already negotiate an amount to contribute to the buyer's agent, then it's up to the buyer's agent to negotiate that amount in seller's concessions. If at the end of the transaction there's a difference between what the buyer agreed to pay and what the buyer's agent is actually getting paid, then the buyer may have to pay that difference. So what does that mean for the buyer's agent? Well, again, you're going to now enter into a formal agreement, written agreement with your buyer before showing them properties. And if you don't already have the strong negotiating skills that a great listing agent has, you're going to have to gain said skills. Before even getting to the point of negotiating your compensation, your skill set has to also be in communicating clearly to your buyer the importance of what you bring to the table and taking them from looking at a home to closing on their dream home.
We feel that you can either change with the world or you can watch as the world passes you by. There makes no bit of difference if you complain and moan about it, so you might as well embrace it, figure out how to use it to your advantage, and move forward. What's important is that you have leadership that can tell you the pros and cons, the facts from the fiction. There's so much misinformation out there. If you go on Facebook, these mastermind groups are not really mastermind groups. It's just a bunch of mob people getting together and just complaining about things. Also, you go to different websites and there's a spin on everything. So it's very important that you keep your head down and stay focused about what's important, and that is serving the consumer.
And now more than ever, it's important to keep the most amount of your hard-earned commission. So think about the brokerage that you're with. Are they serving you correctly? If they are, terrific. If not, consider a brokerage like Iron Valley Real Estate Central Florida, where our commission is 80, 90, and up to 100%.